Hello everybody, I'm Asla. Today we're going to go through this question, which is a midterm question from fall 2015. So first of all, take a minute, pause the video, read the question, work through it together, but just like read the question, and then we will continue. Yeah, okay, I assume you read the question, so let's start. So in creating graphs for MaxFlow questions, we have to first start by determining the variables. In this case, it is pretty simple since we're creating this dating meeting pattern. Our variables, let's see. So first of all, we have to determine variables. And in this case, it's pretty simple. We have man and woman. And each person basically is going to be like one node. So like person I, and let's say woman J. So these are our variables. So the second thing that we always want to do before getting to the complex version is to make sure that we understand all the relationships and like unary, binary constraints between those variables that we just defined. So in this case, we have two things that we have to consider. So we know that ith man is interested in mi many women, and for the jth woman, we know she prefers to meet with at most this many man. So we're gonna talk about what is the importance of one man wanting exactly a certain number of women and one woman at most wanting to meet with a certain amount of men for in the context of how that works with MaxFlow. But first, let's visualize a simple case. Okay, so again, take a minute and then try to create this MaxFlow example using only one man and one woman, and think about the edge weights and think about how each edge should work and what they mean. Okay, so again, I assume you paused it. So okay, in this simple case, we always have the start node, and then we have one man and then let's say one woman here, and then we have the AND node. So while visualizing the simple case, we should not forget the goal here is to show compatible pairs. So one pair in this question is defined as this relationship between one man and one woman, and since we don't need any special weights, we will always go with the simplest case of having one edge weight. And this is gonna show that this man is interested in the woman. And then from woman to the edge case, this edge will basically show that the woman kind of accepts the meet. So we were talking about specific edge weight. So let's consider what this edge will represent. So this is our start node to the first man, and this edge will basically show us how many meets does this man wants to have. So this is going to be the number of choices that M has. So in other words, if this weight this had the weight edge weight of 2, then this node would have the option to maybe meet with another woman, right? And then this woman maybe doesn't want to meet with this person, so we wouldn't have this edge here. So basically, every single edge we have here from S to S between the starting node and the man, this is going to be the number of choices for each man. And then between man and woman, this is going to show a number of different women that this particular man wants to meet with. So we know that in this question, each man I, we have mi many women. So this will basically show that we will have, so let's say we have mi, we will have, for this person, let's say there's more, each of them will have the edge weight of 1, and in total we will have mi edges coming from this particular node. and each of them, of course, is gonna go to like a different woman. Let's say T. So basically, by like defining the edge weight, this was one, by the way, for our simple case. For basically defining the initial edge between the start and this particular man, we allow this man to be able to meet with as many women as he wants. So in this case, if we have MI edges and if this person wants to meet with MI women, then we have to make sure that we give MI edge weight between start and the man. Okay, so let's talk about like a specific woman then. So now we know that in this case we will have to talk about like the incoming edges. Each of these incoming edges is gonna like show a different like man. Let's say 1, 2, 3, but like of course these doesn't have to be in order. And okay, so in this case we want to make sure that this woman I sorry, our women's were J. This woman J meets with at most WJ, meaning man. So in this case, the difference between at most and exactly in the question kind of makes sense, because in this case we have we don't know how many like people want to meet with this woman, but we do know that this person cannot meet with more than WJ, meaning man. So in order to make sure that cap also holds, this time we're gonna add the edge weight in here. So this will basically caps the number of men that this woman will be like allowed to see, basically. Okay, let's move on. We basically went over like the structure for a single man that we need and a single woman that we need. So two things that I really want to like emphasize again is the first and last edges. So like this edge and this edge. We know that this edge between one man and one woman is just going to be like one meeting. But in order to like follow the restrictions that the question gives us, we have to really make sure that like we understand the first edge and the last edge, which respectively is going to signify kind of the aggregated number of preferences for each man and woman. And since we're working with MaxFlow, man's preferences will be exact. So like we need to make sure that we know how many edges this like particular node wants to like give out to, so that we can give that amount of initial weight from start to that person. Similarly for women, because this is a MaxFlow question, we don't need to know exactly how much. It can be less always, but we need to know the maximum amount of people that this woman wants to meet, so that we can update this edge here, the last edge, accordingly. Okay, we will have, let's say we have A man and B woman. This doesn't really matter, but okay, so this is our group of men. We have A of them, and then these are the women. We have B of them. Okay, so we said for start to the first man, we have to make sure that we will accommodate for however many women this man wants to meet with. So it will reflect this particular man's choices. And then let's say like it is gonna like go somewhere, and then all of these meetups is gonna have the edge of 1, so that the number of women that like this person wants to meet is gonna adapt to M1, because we're only giving one edge weight for each of them. Okay, so this is gonna apply to every single node that represent man. Okay, and then they will all have their individual edges based on like who they want to meet. To the end, we're gonna cap the number of meetups that this woman wants to accept, because each edge is each woman is limited by like a certain amount of meetups that they want to do. Okay, so let's talk about like what this algorithm, like what this structure is basically showing us. So once we run MaxFlow algorithm on this, we're gonna find flow F. So F will basically give us the number of total pairs. So number of total and compatible pairings. And this doesn't necessarily mean that all of these pairings are possible, right? Because like it can be the case that this man is compatible with this person, and both women wants to accept it. So it is not necessarily true that all of these compatible pairings can happen at the same time. So do not think like marriage algorithm right now. Okay, so another interesting thing is if the number of if we sum up all the mi here, and if this is equal to f, what does this mean? Like, think about this for a second. I assume you paused it and thought about this, like discussed with your friends. So here, this means all men got all the meetings that they wanted to have. This means all of the dates, all meetings, basically happened, which is really interesting. Okay, and the last thing is to see how do we check for, let's say, M like 7 and woman 11. How do we check like a specific pairing? And in order to do that, we already showed it up here. We said like, oh, if we can find this flow here, let me show like a different color if I can do that. I can't, never mind. Okay, if we can show that there's a flow from S to T involving both of these nodes, then we know that they are one of the compatible pairs. So what we basically do is we create, like, after running the MaxFlow algorithm, we just check that edge, and if it is one of the edges that carries flow, then we know it is it's a pairing. Okay, so this is part A. Let's move on to part B. This is extra credit, but you got this, so you're gonna do it. Okay, so again, take a minute to read the question and then basically think how this is different from part A and what changes, what new information we have now, and how we should adjust like the existing graph. Take a minute. Okay, you took the minute. Okay, so again, we will always start by like considering the simple case, and then we will basically generalize it to make it work for like multiple nodes. From part A to part B, now we have 3 additions, right? So the one thing is now we have 3 days to schedule like all the meetings. So the first thing is all meetings within 3 days. So this is our first adjustment. The second one is going to be no woman wants to meet more than L man on the same day. So woman wants to meet less than L per man per day, not per man, per day. And the last thing is that we want to cap the total meetings per day with M. So total number of meetings per day is going to be capped with this M. So we will basically have to like figure out how to adjust our answer from part A to reflect all of these changes. Okay, so let's start the simple case again. So let's look at the first constraint. So again, let's say we have this woman. Actually, let me draw this here. So we have this woman, and initially what we had from part A was that there are like a bunch of incoming edges, and all of them represent a person who wants to meet with this woman. And then we had this edge that capped the total number of people that this woman wanted to meet. So now from A to B, we want to make sure that this woman meets with all person per day. I mean, I'm talking about 2 right now, but we're gonna get to 1 in a second. Okay, so we basically want to still keep all the people that this person wants to meet, but we want to make sure that this number is going to be divided between 3 days such that none of the days will have more than L meetings. So one easy way to do this is, first of all, in order to preserve this value, we will create this additional node. Let's call it E star. So the idea of this node is to make sure that once we like talk about the L's, this will always have the cap as WI, because what if like 3L could be always more than I, so we don't want to think about this case. So we will always have this edge to make sure that all of the original constraints still hold. Okay, so once we get to this node, we still have WI many people that this woman wants to meet. Now we have to make sure that within the 3 days that we have, no more than L meetings are going to happen. So in order to do that, we're going to just create days, say, and day 3. So first of all, for this woman, we just like took care of the first constraint, that all the meetings are going to happen within 3 days. So this node basically contains all the meetup information. So if I have an edge of edge 1 to day 1, that means that there's like 1 meeting on day 1, and then if I had like 10 here, that means there's like 10 meetings on day 2, and then the same thing for L. So our constraint is that this has to be at most L, so we're going to give L edge weights between the preferences node. Let's call this like preferences. Okay, I can't write. Preferences node to each of the days. So we took care of the first constraint. So all of these are gonna like cap the number of meetings per day. Okay, so we took care of the first 2 things. Now we have to make sure the total number of meetings between anyone is going to be less than M. And how do we do that? Let me move this down first. Okay, so from our original graph, okay, let me just move this up actually. So from our original graph, if we wanted to find the total number of meetings that actually happened, what we would do is we would just look at the sum of these edges, right? The flow from those edges. Because initially, like, each woman has like more preferences than more like kind of meetup opportunities than they might accept. So by just by like summing up the flow from the last set of edges, we can get the total number of meetups that happen. So we're going to use that fact. So so from each woman we had weights. Actually, we don't have to do that, because let's use the thing that we already did. Okay, so let's talk about day 1 and day 2 and day 3. So we already talked about, like, for one particular woman, these day nodes are just going to be mapped with an edge that is capped with L, so that that particular woman is not going to be meeting with more than L people in a day. And we will basically like generalize this over all the women. So each woman is going to be spreading their meetups between 3 days, and this information basically allows us to kind of categorize all the meetings per day. So if we look at this day 1 node, this is going to give us all meetings that happen on day 1, regardless of like which woman and man they're involved. So like it is going to have all the meetings from woman 1, woman 2, woman 3, if there are any. It is just going to have all the incoming edges. And so what we'll do to make sure that total number of meetings per day isn't more than M is that we're going to make sure, regardless of like how many meetings want to happen on day 1, we're going to cap it with M, and we're going to do that for day 2 and day 3 too. So the number of total meetings per day is always going to be less than M, because we made sure that no matter how many edges each of the days, like no matter how many meetings, let's say possible meetings that each day might have, they're only going to be like adjusted, capped by M. So the last thing I want to add is that what we basically showed is that these dummy nodes are going to be preserving all the women's preferences, and they're going to spread it into 3 days. And each of the days are going to be being mapped from every single woman, and they're going to be deciding how many meetings between all of these like different women are going to actually happen. and this is going to be basic